On the morning of December 19, 1944, at 04:30 hours, close to Stockpiles in Belgium, Oberleutnant Friedrich Hartmann lingered in the shadowy hours before dawn, gazing intently at the startling find his scouting team had uncovered moments earlier. Past a recently deserted American position stretched an array of items that would upend every assumption the Wehrmacht held regarding combat strategies, supply chains, and the manufacturing prowess of their adversary. The discovery by these German troops went far beyond mere provisions. It amounted to a profound insight capable of dismantling their views on the very nature of victory in battle. Within those U.S. storage sites lay evidence revealing the alarming reality of the war they were destined to lose, not owing to any shortfall in bravery or battlefield acumen, but because of an overwhelming gap in production capabilities that made any German stand against it a hopeless equation. Just 5 days prior, on December 16, 1944, the German push, later dubbed the Battle of the Bulge, had launched. Known as Operation Wacht am Rhein, this was Adolf Hitler's bold, last-ditch effort aimed at dividing the Allied troops, securing the vital harbor at Antwerp, and compelling a settlement on Western terms. The opening strikes caught the enemy off guard tactically, as 3 full German armies, totaling more than 200,000 troops, surged forward against sparsely defended U.S. lines amid the dense woods of the Ardennes. Leading the charge was Kampfgruppe Peiper, the vanguard unit from the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, which thrust farthest into enemy territory. Led by Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper, the group included roughly 4,000 soldiers, 600 assorted vehicles, and 100 armored tanks. Its objective seemed straightforward on paper, yet proved savagely demanding in practice. Push westward with all haste, capture key spans over the Meuse River, and sow disorder deep behind American lines. Come December 18th, Kampfgruppe Peiper had pressed onward for almost 40 miles, carving a path of devastation. Yet this swift progress sparked a severe issue, one recorded in official German army logs. Petrol usage had ballooned to 300% above projected figures. The mighty Panther and Tiger tanks, though fearsome in combat, guzzled fuel at levels that the crumbling Wehrmacht supply system simply could no longer support. The fuel demands of German armored vehicles posed a severe challenge during the Ardennes offensive. A single Panther tank guzzled 270 liters for every 100 kilometers traveled, while the heavier Tiger II demanded around 450 liters over the identical span. Post-war analysis of seized German operational records exposed the campaign's critical weakness. Strategists had provisioned fuel stocks to last merely the initial 48 hours. Beyond that point, advancing troops were supposed to seize intact U.S. fuel installations and repurpose captured reserves to sustain their momentum. Success of the whole endeavor rested entirely on capturing American supply networks without disruption. On December 19th, at 04:55 hours, Oberlandmann Friedrich Hartmann led the forward scouting detachment within the northern arm of Kampfgruppe Peiper. His force included 3 Panther tanks, 2 half-tracks, and roughly 60 Panzer Grenadiers. While scouting American lines close to Stockpiles, they noticed an abrupt halt in incoming artillery barrages. It seemed U.S. troops were pulling back chaotically, deserting their strong points amid the night. By 05:12 hours, Hartmann's vanguard uncovered the reason. Tucked away in a modest valley about 800 meters westward from Stockpiles, beyond the former American front, sat a deserted forward resupply site that retreating U.S. personnel had left behind. Hartmann detailed this find in his after-action summary, which was eventually retrieved from German wartime files. Such windfalls, encountered by Hartmann's group in those early hours, occurred repeatedly, dozens of instances, in various sectors of the Ardennes front as German formations breached and overtook U.S. defenses. Nevertheless, every first-hand description echoed the same stunned response. Utter incredulity confronted the sheer magnitude of the stockpiled resources. Spanning roughly 4 hectares, the facility sprawled impressively. That morning, at 06:30 hours, Hartmann relayed his findings verbally to his operations officer in a report designed to inventory their astonishing haul. The detailed inventory exposed a supply chain dynamic that flew in the face of all that German troops had known from their own army's operations. Among the provisions were 200,000 liters of gasoline, held in conventional 200-liter drums arranged neatly in lines. There was also about 50,000 liters of diesel fuel, kept apart in its own section. Another 30,000 liters consisted of aviation gasoline designated specifically for aerial missions. Quantities of specialized oils, de-icing agents, and hydraulic substances implied that U.S. troops regarded these essentials as inexhaustible. Provisions for sustenance filled 3 expansive tents, along with several open-air depots. This bounty left the German troops in awe, as they had endured curtailed allotments of food ever since the summer of 1944. There were crates brimming with preserved meats, numbering in the thousands. Actual ground coffee in sealed packages, not the makeshift chicory brew that Wehrmacht personnel had relied on for years. Bars of chocolate, packs of cigarettes, and heaps of sugar, all in volumes that defied belief for soldiers whose nation back home languished in famine due to the Allied naval stranglehold. One full tent brimmed with medical provisions, sulfa medications, vials of morphine, units of plasma, rolls of bandages, and tools for surgery, every item plentiful beyond measure. For months, German field medics had stretched these resources thin, deciding patient care in part by what little stock remained. Stockpiled here was sufficient gear to sustain a frontline medical facility through extended campaigns. The depot for munitions highlighted the U.S. military's philosophy on wartime provisioning. Rounds for 105mm and 155mm artillery pieces piled high in the thousands. Bullets for rifles and pistols amounting to millions. Boxed-in timber containers stamped with manufacturing timestamps from mere weeks prior. Grenades for throwing, attachments for rifles, and projectiles for mortars, all amassed in such profusion that it implied American units anticipated unleashing firepower with scant regard for depletion risks. Supplies for upkeep of vehicles encompassed spare components for lorries, light reconnaissance cars, and armored vehicles. Crated engines stood prepared for swift integration into vehicles. Gearboxes, segments of tracks, and wheels designed for Sherman tanks filled the storage areas. Stacks of tires, numbering in the hundreds and available in assorted dimensions, awaited distribution. Since 1943, German repair teams had resorted to stripping parts from broken-down machinery to keep others operational. In contrast, U.S. troops seemed to favor swapping out whole units instead of mending individual broken pieces. Amid the supply tents, soldiers' individual gear was strewn about haphazardly. Insulated winter attire, along with suitable apparel for harsh cold conditions that Wehrmacht personnel sorely lacked. footwear, evidently allocated in several sets per serviceman and spanning different sizes. Insulated sleeping sacks, an item never distributed to German foot soldiers. Shelters, heating units, and utensils for meal preparation, all crafted with a balance of practicality and user well-being in mind. For signaling and coordination, the gear encompassed radio devices far superior to those employed by the German army. Coiled telephone lines extending to thousands of meters in length. Power cells, electron tubes, and spares for all manner of electrical apparatus. Evidently, the U.S. approach incorporated built-in backups across every facet, guaranteeing that contact lines stayed active even amid heavy hardware casualties. Yet, the most astonishing aspect of the find lay in its insights into the U.S. replenishment processes. Timestamps on the gear and provisions showed that the vast majority of these materials had come off assembly lines no more than 3 months earlier. Certain rounds of ammo carried markings from as recently as November 1944, mere weeks prior to their seizure. Far beyond simply sustaining transatlantic logistics, the United States was routinely shipping brand-new products straight to troops at the front. Hartmann's troops wasted no time in siphoning gasoline into their own machines. The Panzer Grenadiers ransacked the rations, cramming their uniforms with bars of chocolate and packs of smokes. This pillaging stemmed not from any breakdown in order, but from sheer desperation. For days, these Wehrmacht fighters had pushed forward on meager allotments of sustenance, with fuel indicators dipping perilously low and their machines in urgent want of repair parts, essentials that the Reich's supply network could no longer furnish. By Euro 7:20 hours, Hartmann transmitted his observations via radio to the command post of Kampfgruppe Peiper. Almost immediately, instructions arrived in reply. They directed him to safeguard the site, extract as much fuel and provisions as feasible, and ready the seized goods for relocation to the German lines behind the front. Comparable directives flowed out throughout the Ardennes region as advancing German troops stumbled upon U.S. logistical setups. During the broader Ardennes campaign, the repeated unearthing of these American stockpiles by German soldiers revealed a recurring trend, one that post-war military scholars would scrutinize for generations. Far from random windfalls, these seizures exposed a profound technological and productive gulf dividing the opposing armies. In the opening days of the assault, Hauptmann Werner Sternberg, who served as the logistics chief for the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, meticulously recorded details on the U.S. equipment and resources taken. Unearthed decades later from German wartime records in the 1970s, Sternberg's accounts offered a quantitative breakdown that laid bare the staggering differences in supply operations between the Wehrmacht and Allied forces. From December 16 to December 23, 1944, units of the German Army in the Ardennes area seized or located 47 U.S. storage facilities, ranging from modest outposts to extensive installations. Sternberg divided them into 3 distinct classes in his evaluation: advanced distribution sites such as the cache Hartmann had located, mid-tier depots sustaining battalions of 500 to 800 troops, and substantial regimental-level hubs. Remarkably, even the tiniest of these frontline positions held greater quantities of gear than their German equivalents. Among all the revelations, the abundance of petroleum products left the German supply specialists in particular dismay. Sternberg's estimates indicated that the volume of American gasoline seized surpassed 2.8 million liters in total. That amount outstripped the full supply designated for the 6th Panzer Army during the initial 7 days of the operation. In their withdrawal, U.S. troops evidently left behind a greater stockpile of fuel than what Germany had gathered for its most ambitious campaign in the West since 1940. Yet the sheer volume failed to convey the full picture. Variations in fuel quality exposed even graver insights into the disparities in industrial strength between the two sides. The gasoline from America featured octane levels of at least 80, ideal for powering advanced aircraft motors. Meanwhile, Germany's synthetic fuel manufacturing, hampered by relentless strikes from Allied bombers, yielded aviation-grade gasoline at just 87 octane and as little as 74 for use in terrestrial machinery. As a result, the Wehrmacht found itself compelled to lower compression ratios in the latest tank models, since the inferior fuel could not sustain engines built for peak output. Comparisons of food provisions highlighted equally dramatic disparities. Captured supply records outlined U.S. ration guidelines, granting each soldier 4,758 calories daily during active combat duties. By December 1944, German allotments stood at roughly 2,500 calories per day, with frontline realities frequently cutting this amount even lower. This nourishment kept American troops at optimal physical capacity. In contrast, German fighters endured gradual malnutrition amid the battles. Among the various U.S. rations that German troops encountered was the K ration, featuring canned meat, biscuits, chocolate bars, coffee, sugar, cigarettes, and chewing gum, all packed into about 800 grams. The German iron ration, meant for urgent needs, offered only hard bread and canned meat, amounting to around 400 grams. Thus, even American emergency packs surpassed typical German field distributions in both volume and nutritional value. On December 20th, 1944, Oberst Heilmann, leader of the 5th Fallschirmjäger Division, directed a thorough stock-taking of seized American resources at a regimental storage site that his airborne units had captured close to Wiltz, Luxembourg. Prior to their retreat, due to advancing German forces, this site had provisioned parts of the 28th Infantry Division. As noted in the division's official logs, Heilmann's assessment tallied 150,000 single-meal units, sufficient to sustain his whole command for almost 2 weeks. Among the medical items were 40,000 penicillin doses, a treatment that German military efforts had failed to produce domestically. The stockpile included more than 200,000 cigarettes as well as 50,000 chocolate bars. In addition, the facility held 3,000 wool blankets, 2,000 pairs of winter boots, and 500 full sets of winter uniforms. Yet the revelation that unsettled investigators the most stemmed from records related to production. Stamps on each supply crate, piece of gear, and ammunition container revealed details about when and where they were made. Personnel under Heilmann scrutinized these labels, arriving at an insight that upended their grasp of military operations. The bulk of these materials dated from production between September and November 1944. Originating in America, the items crossed the Atlantic, navigated European logistics chains, and reached frontline troops mere weeks after being created. In stark contrast, German manufacturing efforts had deteriorated into chaos by the end of 1944. Post-war historical reviews of records from Albert Speer's Armaments Ministry highlighted the devastating effects of bombing by the Allies. Output of German artillery shells, covering every caliber, had hit its high point in September 1944, totaling roughly 1.2 million units per month. Come December, German output of artillery shells had dropped sharply to just 750,000 per month, marking a 37% decline over the preceding 3 months. In contrast, U.S. manufacturing of ammunition during that time frame surpassed 2.5 million shells each month, as reported by the U.S. War Production Board. The American industrial effort went beyond merely surpassing German output. It was equipping several fronts of conflict spanning the Pacific and European regions at the same time, whereas German efforts barely sustained commitments to one theater alone. Nowhere was the disparity more glaring than in the realm of armored vehicles. During 1944, U.S. factories turned out around 17,500 Sherman tanks. That year, their German counterparts assembled roughly 6,000 Panther tanks, along with about 1,000 Tiger tanks, for a combined total of 7,000 main battle tanks. Thus, the United States churned out over twice that number of tanks, all while generating vast quantities of planes, naval vessels, and additional war materiel on a level far beyond Germany's reach. Yet frontline German troops, stumbling upon U.S. supply caches, had no way of knowing these industrial figures. The evidence confronting them painted an unmistakable picture, one that underscored a tale of industrial imbalance, rendering German success a statistical absurdity. What the troops had seized amounted to nothing more than standard American logistical operations, rather than any extraordinary stockpiles or urgent backups. Such was the everyday functioning of U.S. forces. The findings within those U.S. depots sparked a wave of insights rippling through the upper echelons of the German command, reaching well past mere battlefield tactics. What started as chance scavenging of foe resources transformed into a deep-seated mental unraveling, as troops and leaders alike grappled with the sheer improbability of prevailing against such overwhelming productive might. On December 23, 1944, Oberst Otto Reimer, who led the Führerbegleiter Brigade, gathered his top staff for an urgent conference at his command post close to Bastogne. Records from that session, saved among seized German papers, exposed conversations that mere weeks prior might have branded as treasonous pessimism, yet now embodied an inescapable truth. Reimer's intel specialist delivered a breakdown of the U.S. provisions taken from sites the brigade had breached or uncovered during its push. Over the course of 7 days in the assault, they had accessed 12 such U.S. storage locations. The haul encompassed 380,000 liters of petroleum, 45,000 food provisions, 12,000 rounds for cannons, along with assorted gear appraised at more than 2 million Reichsmarks. Even with these gains, however, the brigade's provisions teetered on the edge of disaster. The irony proved crushing. While German troops seized stockpiles exceeding what their own supply lines could transport over a full 3 weeks of standard activity, U.S. units simply left behind these resources as standard casualties amid strategic pullbacks. In essence, the retreating Americans discarded greater quantities than the entire German logistical apparatus could furnish. Major Heinrich Vogel, who served as operations officer under Reimer, voiced a sentiment shared by many yet rarely expressed aloud. This isn't a contest against a conventional military, it's a battle with an industrial machine that approaches combat like a manufacturing challenge. Each U.S. serviceman embodies vast backing from support networks, whereas every German fighter signifies ever fewer gains from a crumbling resource base. Such an observation underscored a profound evolution in the mindset of the German High Command. From 1939 onward, Wehrmacht principles had prioritized superior battlefield maneuvers and strategic prowess as ways to amplify strength when facing foes with greater numbers. The underlying belief was that Germany's edge in combat tactics would counterbalance the Allies' superiority in resources. Yet the captured storage facilities demonstrated how such vast disparities in materiel could utterly eclipse even the finest tactical abilities. On December 24th, General Lieutenant Fritz Kramer, the Chief of Staff for the 6th Panzer Army, prepared a detailed review titled Comprehensive Analysis of American Logistics, addressed to Field Marshal Walter Modell. Drawn from German records after the war, this document stood as one of the most exhaustive evaluations by Germany of U.S. production might throughout the conflict. In his breakdown, Kramer estimated that the American goods taken by Germans in the Ardennes amounted to roughly 4% of the overall U.S. supply framework sustaining efforts across Western Europe. The sites overrun by German units functioned merely as advanced distribution hubs, far from the primary installations. Deeper reserves in France held perhaps 20-fold the volume of what had been seized. Moreover, these central depots received steady resupplies via coastal harbors, where vessels unloaded cargo straight from the United States. The calculations painted a stark picture. Should advancing U.S. storage sites hold materials that Nazi troops viewed as vital stockpiles, and given that such sites accounted for merely 4% of overall American logistical resources in the theater, then the full extent of U.S. provisioning power outstripped Germany's by margins so vast that direct parallels became untenable. The Reich wasn't simply falling short in a contest of logistical edges. Rather, it was succumbing to a conflict defined by entirely disparate scales of production might. Yet Kramer's assessment delved deeper, scrutinizing U.S. logistical doctrine as gleaned from seized papers and battlefield behaviors. The American approach relied on a forward-driven model, dispatching goods to frontline elements in an unbroken stream, irrespective of whether they had been called for. In contrast, the Wehrmacht's method functioned on a demand-led basis, with troops submitting requisitions that superior commands endeavored to fulfill according to what stocks permitted. The U.S. framework presupposed plentiful resources and prioritized uninterrupted access at the front lines. The German one proceeded from the premise of limited provisions and focused on meticulous distribution of assets. Far from mere variations in tackling an identical challenge, these strategies embodied profoundly contrasting foundations of manufacturing prowess. The United States had the luxury of sustaining such proactive shipments because its output levels turned surplus into the norm. The Third Reich, constrained by production shortfalls, was compelled to impose stringent controls to bridge the gap between needs and capabilities. On the evening of December 24, 1944, in the Ardennes region, troops from Germany marked the Christmas season using provisions seized from the United States forces. They consumed U.S. military meals, lit up American tobacco products, and donned captured winter gear sourced from storage facilities. A profound sense of irony hung over these gatherings. While their homeland faced famine and labored to sustain its military output, these men endured thanks to the very resources of their adversaries. Unteroffizier Hans Wegner, who led a squad in the 12th Volksgrenadier Division, penned a note to his spouse that day. "Today, Our Christmas meal came straight from American stockpiles. Genuine coffee, tinned beef, sweets, and smokes. For the first time in many weeks, the troops felt a spark of joy. Yet my mind kept returning to how much sustenance the Americans left behind in their withdrawal, far exceeding what we get through standard allotments. What chance do we have against foes who treat such plenty as everyday fare? The official broadcasts claim we're prevailing, but the reality staring me in the face paints a far grimmer picture. Correspondents such as Wegener's, either seized by Allied spies during the conflict or unearthed in post-war archives, laid bare the deep emotional toll of stumbling upon these enemy stockpiles. German ranks had long been drilled to view privations as honorable offerings toward triumph. Yet facing such vast enemy wealth transformed those hardships into something pointless, stripping away their valor. When opponents discarded goods that German units would fiercely defend, it forced a stark question. What did this reveal about the conflict's probable end? This realization rippled into the higher echelons, influencing tactical deliberations among commanders. General der Panzertruppen Hasso von Manteuffel, at the helm of the 5th Panzer Army, forwarded a private dispatch to Field Marshal Model on December 26th. Though worded with subtle caution, the document's implications rang clear. Seized U.S. provisions validate prior evaluations of the foe's manufacturing prowess. German troops found it impossible to secure overarching goals against an adversary boasting such overwhelming logistical advantages. While isolated battlefield triumphs might still occur, broader triumphs demanded an equivalence in resources that lay far beyond their reach. The evaluation from von Manteuffel stood out as an unusually candid admission by a high-ranking German leader toward the close of 1944. By conceding that sheer material disparities rendered overall success unattainable, he directly challenged the Nazi doctrine's core tenet that sheer determination and martial resolve alone could tip the scales. Yet, for commanders who grappled with the unvarnished truth instead of ideological rhetoric, the stark realities visible in the captured supply installations left no room for illusion. The Ardennes campaign, known as the Battle of the Bulge, formally concluded on January 25, 1945, even as German units had grasped the operation's collapse several weeks prior. Those American stockpile sites uncovered amid the 6 weeks of fierce fighting served as a stark emblem for grasping not only the defeat in this engagement, but the broader collapse of the German war effort. The tangible proof they offered confirmed the insights drawn from production metrics and reconnaissance reports alike. In the era of industrialized conflict, manufacturing prowess had emerged as the ultimate arbiter of outcomes, diminishing the role of conventional soldierly qualities in securing triumph. For the Ardennes offensive, the ultimate German toll tallied roughly 67,000 dead, 100,000 injured, and more than 30,000 taken prisoner. Armored and artillery vehicle casualties neared 800 tanks and assault guns, alongside 1,000 planes and countless transport units. With Germany's production base in ruins and petroleum reserves dwindling, such setbacks proved utterly beyond replenishment. The United States suffered grievous setbacks of its own, with about 19,000 fatalities, 47,000 injuries, and 23,000 personnel seized. Nevertheless, the vast American manufacturing engine allowed for swift restoration of these depletions, enabling relentless advances without interruption. On January 28, 1945, General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, who held overall command of German troops in the West, delivered his concluding evaluation of the offensive to OKW headquarters. This document, seized following the war's end, offered an exceptionally candid examination. The campaign had validated the insights gleaned from intercepted American stockpiles. Our adversary possesses an industrial might that dooms any traditional armed opposition to failure. The overwhelming edge in American resources surpasses levels at which battlefield expertise could offer substantial offset. Achieving success demands either matching industrial output or a breakdown in the enemy's political structure. Outcomes that seem entirely out of reach. In his appraisal, von Rundstedt displayed striking candor as Germany's top leader in the Western theater. He was, in essence, declaring that persisting in the fight held no military value, even as political factors barred him from advocating capitulation. The seized American storage sites furnish the undeniable proof that compelled this judgment upon any leader prepared to confront facts over dogma. In February 1945, reports from Foreign Armies West sought to measure the production gap exposed by those supply finds. U.S. manufacturing outpaced Germany's by 3-1 in steel, 5-1 in aluminum, 4-1 in military vehicles, and 3-1 in aircraft. Yet these bare output numbers failed to capture the full extent of the imbalance. While American factories sustained several combat zones at once, German efforts barely sustained operations on one front. The disparity in petroleum resources delivered the most crushing blow. In 1944, the United States churned out more than 5 million barrels of oil each day. Germany's synthetic fuel output reached its highest point at around 180,000 barrels per day, only to plummet to a mere 50,000 barrels daily by the start of 1945 amid relentless Allied air assaults. This left American output dwarfing Germany's by margins nearing 100-1. Even the fuel stocks seized from abandoned American storage sites, treated by the U.S. as standard operational write-offs, outstripped the total monthly yield from all German production facilities as the conflict drew to a close. Questioning of German officers after the war's end uncovered how these finds of enemy stockpiles had deeply shaken their tactical outlooks. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich Eberbach, taken prisoner in September 1944, and later briefed on the Ardennes campaign while in captivity, remarked during his debriefing, "When I learned that German forces had captured vast American supplies, yet still failed due to logistics problems, I understood the war was truly lost. If capturing enemy supplies didn't solve our supply crisis, nothing could. American industrial capacity had made German victory mathematically impossible." The emotional toll reached down to the rank-and-file troops as well. Personal correspondence and journals unearthed in the aftermath laid bare how these encounters with seized provisions, far from lifting spirits with the promise of newfound assets, frequently sparked a sense of hopelessness by exposing the overwhelming might of the foe. Frontline fighters, long-fed tales of Teutonic manufacturing prowess, now faced undeniable proof that U.S. everyday supply chains surpassed the pinnacle of what their own nation could muster. Gefreiter Ernst Bauer, serving as a foot soldier in the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, penned in the final days of January 1945, "We captured American supplies that seemed like treasure to us." In the midst of the conflict, the sight of discarded provisions, rations, tobacco, pharmaceuticals, garments, left a profound impression. Yet the U.S. troops simply left these goods behind and pressed on with their campaign, acting as though such losses carried no weight at all. It was at that moment that the truth dawned. Victory was beyond our grasp. Facing a foe who regarded such vast stores as disposable, we confronted an adversary whose reserves dwarfed anything within our power to rival. What chance did we have against an adversary for whom the squandering of assets we viewed as priceless was merely the everyday price of warfare? The revelations from those captured U.S. storage sites reshaped the High Command's approach during the war's closing stages, even as, by the start of 1945, efforts had shifted from pursuing triumph to merely staving off the unavoidable collapse. Those crafting plans for defense came to see that the enemy's supply chains would enable relentless assaults, no matter how fiercely we opposed them. Attempts to sever those lines proved futile, given the overlapping networks that allowed the Americans to rebound from any isolated setbacks. With no other options, the sole path forward involved exacting a toll in lives, aiming to render the ongoing push into our territory a burden too heavy for their leaders to bear politically. Yet mounting a fight capable of turning the tide on the battlefield was no longer feasible. By March 1945, as the coalition armies forded the Rhine and thrust deep into the heart of the Reich, our own forces stumbled upon U.S. logistical hubs right within our borders. Set up to fuel the invaders' campaigns on German ground, these installations brimmed with such overwhelming plenty that it exposed the hollowness of the regime's boasts about the nation's manufacturing might. Ordinary people, catching sight of these stockpiles, at last grasped the harsh lesson frontline troops had absorbed long before. Their country had been overwhelmed by a juggernaut of production far exceeding any strength they could muster. The ultimate tally from the Ardennes campaign only underscored the insights gleaned from those supply finds. The Reich had burned through vital, irrecoverable assets in a push that yielded fleeting battlefield successes but delivered no lasting edge. Meanwhile, the American military weathered the blows, replenished its ranks through sheer manufacturing prowess, and surged ahead with their attacks uninterrupted. The outcome followed an unyielding logic of numbers. A country generating 30% of global industrial production overwhelmed another that accounted for just 8%, relying solely on the raw calculus of manufacturing power directed toward conflict. After the war, scholars from both the United States and Germany, in their examinations of military operations, pinpointed the revelations at American supply depots as a pivotal turning point in the downfall of the Wehrmacht. Prior to the events in the Ardennes, troops from Germany could sustain their fight by clinging to notions of tactical brilliance, strong defensive positions, or the prospect of fractures within the Allied coalition. But following the Ardennes offensive, once they witnessed the sheer plenty of American resources up close, those justifications evaporated for frontline fighters facing undeniable proof of the foe's vast dominance. In its post-war evaluation, the United States Strategic Bombing Survey determined that the German armed forces' success hinged fundamentally on manufacturing strength, far more than on strategic maneuvers or the caliber of its personnel. When Allied air campaigns cut German output to levels insufficient for basic functioning, collapse was assured, no matter how well units performed in combat. During the Battle of the Bulge, the encounters with these supply depots offered German leaders stark confirmation of the production gap that sealed the war's direction. Historians of the era acknowledged these depot findings as exposing a profound shift in the character of 20th-century combat. The scale of a nation's industry now dictated victory. relegating mastery of tactics and troop excellence to lesser roles once production imbalances grew extreme enough. Though Germany boasted skilled fighters and commanders, its manufacturing shortcomings rendered those strengths futile against adversaries who embraced strategies built on endless supplies. In our time, the spots in the Ardennes, where German units stumbled upon U.S. stockpiles, stand as enduring symbols of history. Markers and monuments commemorate the precise areas where those soldiers grappled with the harsh truth of industrialized battle. These serene woodland settings not only hosted maneuvers on the ground, but also marked profound shifts in mindset, as dreams of triumph shattered against the stark reality of an insurmountable gap in resources.